This is Geek Gab with your hosts, Dornall and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Geek Gab for Saturday, September 18th, 2021. Dornall, how was your week?
Hey man, my week's been pretty good. I don't have much to tell, but I do have I must give a heartfelt apology for everybody hanging out in the chat live. The technical difficulties today are all mine. We got our first big storm last night, and big storms are uncommon where I'm at. And so there's a handful of people without power. And just as I was about to settle in and get started on the show, my internet went out. And there's no promises today. If it happens again, you guys will know.
Is that technical difficulties or an act of God?
Yeah, that's it. I don't think it matters either way to for chat. We're a little bit later than normal. What can I say? I thought I was getting a signal. How do you interpret that? Do you interpret that as, you know what, John, just cancel the show and go back to bed, or stick through it? You know, have faith and persevere. I chose the latter, and I'm glad for it.
No, I mean, like, technically, certain events are covered under insurance policies and things as acts of God. And your insurance company gets away with not covering them if it's an act of God.
Yeah, they call that force majeure.
Force majeure, yeah.
Yeah, that's clause in contracts. That's
so I'm just wondering.
If force majeure happens, you just start running.
I'm just wondering if the storms and the internet outage, they're not really technical difficulties. They're just more of an act of God.
It's true. But
like big, huge storms. Can't do anything about that.
Well, I mean, in my mind, they're the same thing. You guys know the story about the reason why software defects are called bugs, right?
No.
I have heard that story, but I have no idea if that story is even true.
Back in the old days when computers were vacuum tubes in a giant closet where you'd need a whole server room held one mainframe computer, and it was just a series of tubes and boards and wires and everything going around. There was someone who was working on a program, and I forget where this was. I think it was either ENIAC or whatever, one of those old vacuum tube computers. And this guy's got the old punched card system where he's painstakingly written out his program and punched a bunch of cards to feed into the machine, and he kept getting bad results or a mistake or something like that. So he's for hours he's trying to figure out, okay, what the heck is going on with this program? What is wrong with the machine? He finally goes into the server room, goes into the innards, and finds one of the electrical connections was shorting because a fly had gotten into the room and landed on it and died. And so there is literally a physical bug in the computer preventing it from operating as expected. So that's why software defects are called bugs.
Okay.
And when they go around removing those bugs, it was called debugging.
Debugging. And now debugging means something slightly different. If you're working in specifically if you're working with a program, debugging is the process of watching the program as it executes and looking at all the data that's in the computer so that you can try and figure out what it's doing wrong. Like someone tells you, hey, this program isn't working, well, then you sort of run the program and then step by step you watch what the computer's doing so that you can see where you expect it to go left, but it goes right. That's now called debugging. I don't know. computer science history is I guess interesting to me.
Oh, it's interesting when you learn the names of where things came from.
It's great. I love that.
Speaking of learning names, we have a guest today.
Yeah, it's been a while. Welcome back to the show, Michael Tierney.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, I I caught up on all your stuff on wildstars.com. Would you mind giving yourself a little bit of introduction here for everybody?
All right, my name is Michael Tierney. I've been independently publishing since 1977. I had my first story published when I was still like in junior high. So I'm a writer, an artist, independent publisher. I'm a journeyman printer. I'm also do a lot of computer work. I do Photoshop. Doing digital restoration of lost artworks. A couple of years ago, I had published my 4-volume. Edgar Rice Burroughs' 100-Year Art Chronology. That was published by Chenault and Gray. And they're about to do my next art chronology, which is another massive 4-book. This will be like 1,500 pages with, 5,000, probably more like 10,000 or 15,000 images in it for the Robert E. Howard art chronology. That's a project I'm working on right now. Other material I got going on the creative side is I've had a series of books and comics that I've written and sometimes illustrated and once even printed since 1977 called Wild Stars. The concept behind there, it's kind of like you had the Wild West. Well, when you go out to explore the stars, that's the new frontier. That's the Wild Stars. And so we're in a region of the Wild Stars. And so, that's I wrote a series of novels back in the 70s. And one of those novels was the basis of the first comics I started publishing back in 84. Did a few portfolios, ended up doing 3 volumes all the way up through 2002, collected those into a big graphic novel called Wild Stars, the Book of Circles. And so that's something I've been working on for a long, long time. I had a spinoff of a series called Force Majeure, as we were talking about earlier. The acts of God's like nothing you can do about it. Insurance contracts are all off. And it was set on Mars in the not so distant future. And that was illustrated by another fellow. That was supposed to be a trilogy of comics. It was a spinoff that was going to lead into my next Wild Stars story arc. Well, then the artist disappeared on me 10 pages into the second book of a trilogy. You can't change artists. 10 pages into the second book of a trilogy.
Oh no.
Yeah, so what I did is I just said, well, okay, I can work this into the story. And so I made it, a reason why the first book was a graphic novel and the reason why the second book, had elements that were illustrated. And then I novelized the rest of it and I published that as the Wild Stars 2 Force Majeure. And then did the Egg Rice Burroughs chronology after that, or not? Egg Rice Burroughs chronology after that, and then I went back to my Wild Stars and did a third novel called Time War Armageddon. Well, by that time, I'd been publishing short stories with Kursova magazine, and one of the short stories that they did real well with was a collaboration or posthumous collaboration I did with Edgar Rice Burroughs on a Tarzan story that he had never completed. Everybody's like, well, I don't know what to do with this thing. And I looked at something. I knew immediately what to do. I had an idea instantly. It's like, yeah, this actually explains away some things that always bothered me about the original stories. And so I wrote that, and he published it, and we got permission, of course, obviously from Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. And so I got that lost story published. And of course, it got lost again even after I wrote it, because originally I did that with Danton Burroughs, Edgar Rice Burroughs' grandson. Well, he died. When he died, all the information, all the knowledge about what I was doing was lost. And there, for a while, they thought it was a story I completely made up. They were like, no, keep all the money. Like, no, you guys need to get half of it. And but finally, when they realized that, oh, yeah, that is Edgar Rice Burroughs did part of it, they were like, yeah, okay, no problem on the contract because it was already in place. And but the nice thing about it is that everybody who reads the story cannot figure out which part is mine. So I guess you could say I aped his style. And because if they guess, they usually guess it wrong. They think the part I wrote was his part. And his part, then they think that his part was my part. So I guess I wrote more like Burroughs than what they thought Burroughs wrote like. Well, then I was telling about this other, All Stars novel I was doing, and he's like, well, yeah, we want to publish that. So he just published that straight as a novel. And then I was coming up on my 35th anniversary. Well, I knocked out another novel called Wild Stars 4, and the third one was called Time War Armageddon. As you can tell, there's time travel in these. The fourth one was called Wild Stars Rising. And there's one of the original covers that was by Tim Lim, who did that cover on the original. Those are sold out and out of print right there. and that one was the main cover. And then below that, we had a couple of variants that were made. This one there is by Mark Wheatley. That was the trade paperback wraparound variant. And then below that, and this is what I really enjoyed, that's the hardcover variant. Only 50 copies were made of that. No text on the cover. It was just such a beautiful image that just leave it alone. And and, that was a Kickstarter. We just printed it to, demand, and it was sold out. Well, then when the next year I rolled around, I had another novel I had written called Wild Star Rising. And that's it on the left. And then when we got together, he went ahead and published all 4 of the Wild Stars in a matching companion set with all new covers by Mark Wheatley. So that's the Book of Circles actually on the top left. That's Force Majeure on the right. That's the Time War Armageddon on the bottom left. And then on the bottom right is Wild Star Rising, which I finally go back because one of the concepts behind the Wild Stars is that 75,000 years ago, mankind made our first migration into the stars. And so every story we've ever had of space gods and UFOs, that's just been Cuz coming back for a visit. And we're actually related. Those are our ancestors. And but in a different way because we're just separate evolution. But so that one right there on the Wild Star Rising explains why that migration happened 75,000 years ago, colonizing planets circling the nearest stars in the night sky, which are the wild stars. And so I finally gave you that story, and so that really completed a lot of the mysteries of the wild stars. And so then the next novel I did, I'm just knocking one a year out now, was a book called let's see, okay, so I did that one. And one thing before I forget, if you scroll down a little bit lower, he also did an omnibus where I collected all 4 of those, and I worked up a brand new, basically I called it the Multiversal Guide. One of my original publications was actually called Multiversal Scribe. Well, I called this one Multiversal Guide, which gives you all the background and everything about all those characters, all settings. Elements of that was actually used to make a role-playing game through Troll Lords. And it's just a massive universe with different time settings. And so that's got everything in one big package. That's like 700 and some pages on that one. And so that was all the 35th anniversary stuff. And then, the next one we just came out with it was Wild Stars 5. He serialized that in a Kursova magazine this year. And it was in 3 parts. Oh, there's the Amazing Adventures role-playing game of Wild Stars there. And
that's cool.
Yeah,
you're in my wheelhouse now in the role-playing game. I'm gonna try not to click on that.
Yeah, it got great reviews. And then here's the one that he ran this year, which just completed being published on Wednesday, part 3, and that's the Atomic Paradigm. And so it's kind of funny. After I did my book, The Circles, some people were like, "Well, hey, wait, the bad guys are still alive, and I have a long-term plan for them." And this is basically where the bad guys. It's kind of like the Empire Strikes Back in the series. And it's one thing I've told Alex Alexander, the publisher, is I've got a 12-book plan on this, and this is kind of like my Empire Strikes Back, chapter of the story where bad guys really get upper hand and really start taking control of all the things they've been manipulating for like a couple of 100 years at this point. Which there's a lot of story back around there about how they're still around, and then so that takes the story another step forward. And then I've already sold him next year's novel, and it's completed. It'll be published in 4 parts, and Kursova through all the books he does in 2002. That one's going to be called Orphan of the Shadowy Moons. Now, that was one of the novels I originally wrote back in the 70s. And so that's the story. I knocked it out, and but I was in the middle of moving from Kansas to Arkansas, which is where I'm at now. So I had a big move in the middle of it. So I just never really did anything with it once I wrote it. And then I went on to the next novel, which was the basis for the comics that I was publishing. And so I always wanted to get back to Orphan of the Shadowy Moons, which was originally called Moon Shadow. The reason I changed the title is since the time I wrote it, the name Moon Shadow has been used for a lot of different things. So I wanted to do something a little different there. So that's why I came up with a new title. And that was just a fun little story. And it was great because I had never shown it to any editors. So none of my stuff had ever been swiped. So very original. And in some aspects of it, actually, maybe are going to be more accessible to readers now because of things that have happened and things have changed. Things I was doing that were just really crazy, fantastic back then Now they're like, oh yeah, we can see that happening now. So sometimes I was maybe a little too far ahead of the game. Things I always used to hear from editors back in the '70s when I was trying to sell the books. So that comes out next year. Now that one goes back even further because it gives you the origin of a main character in a series called the Ancient Warrior. And so this gives you his origin, his history. If you want to go back to really where the Wild Stars began, that's where Canada, although they weren't the Wild Stars at that time. But that's his origin, his beginning. It gives you all the background. He had this tragic romance with a woman by the name of Phaedra, so you get all the details on that. You find out about some of the adversaries who are running through all the Wild Stars now. That's where they get their origin. So it's going to kind of go back even further and give you all the beginning stuff. The reason I didn't start there with the comics and the story is because I always felt that with where I did begin with the Book of Circles is that you need to have it grounded to where a reader can envelop themselves and say, okay, I can see this happening, and it was set in the real world. I know one reviewer called it Dallas meets Star Wars or something like that, and because you had backwoods dirty dealing mixed with planetary genocide. So before you start having too many big concepts beyond that, I felt you just had to ground it in the real world first, and then move off into the fantastic stuff because then people are already grounded in reality. And so that's my Wild Stars there, and I'm already getting ready to work. I've got a lot of them plotted out of the next 6 novels, and there's a definite ending on this. I've had it in mind since the beginning, and having all these other novels written, that way I could have this big, long, complicated story and keep it cohesive. And I remember on the Book of Circles, it was a complicated story too. I called it Time Travel Twice Told. And I remember one reviewer, I love this review. He said, by the middle of the story, the reader will be convinced he's on a runaway literary freight train that's constantly laying fresh track down in front. And by the time you get to the end, it wraps up with an elegant twist that leaves the reader feeling like a stupefied Watson at the end of a Sherlock Holmes mystery. So, I was like, that's exactly what I was going for. I tell it in long form, and then I repeat it in short form. Now, another thing with the Book of Circles, too, is something nobody would ever get or guess is it's arranged in the form of a football game. Begins with a pregame talk, starts with a whistle, and then ends with a gunshot by a man wearing a striped shirt, and then goes into a sudden death overtime. So that's something. It's actually in the form that nobody would ever notice unless I told them. So these are fun to put together. I just do a lot of wild things. So many things that I was having crazy ideas on have actually ended up happening. So many times I've kind of predicted the future. It's been wild. It's kind of funny that upper
Well,
right.
that sounds like fun. Like, what's one really cool thing that came out afterwards when you say, "Oh yeah, I wrote that back in 1990, whatever."
Oh, discovering water on Mars. Like if you scroll back up a little bit, go to that force majeure shot.
This one right here.
No, a little bit further. Yeah, right there. Now, if you see, we'll click on that one.
This one?
No, yeah, that one there. Yeah, and see,
Okay.
I don't know if I show the whole thing there, but maybe scroll. Yeah, click on the force majeure and then scroll down a little bit. You're going to see a picture from a NASA rover, and it's I had water erupting on Mars and this and that. Well, then a NASA rover, like 10 years later, takes a picture and it discovers they didn't know water was on Mars at that time. And then 10 years later, they got the rover on there and it's discovering geysers. And the geyser pattern in the picture, you would have thought we copied the cover after that picture. Yeah, right there, that geyser pattern is almost like what it is on the main cover.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then over there you see that the big space rock that came through last year. Well, that's just like the Marzanti spike, where I had basically alien colonization was going, where they would send these spikes to impact on planets to code their genetic material into the evolution of the planet. To kind of basically that's their way of colonization is they just genetically rewrite you. And so I had these things running around where they spike the planets to create it. Well, then we had that come through the galaxy, just a few years ago. So yeah, it's just wild sometimes about how you write these ideas and then something happens in real life. Like, wow, okay, that's ended up being right, dovetailed perfectly with my story.
That's cool. It's like your imagination comes up with something and it's plausible, and because it's plausible, you never know, it might actually happen.
Yeah, once you go back to the main page and then scroll back down, and I got one website just kind of dealing with all these kind of unreal predictions. If you get down to the Wild Stars 5,
Yeah.
Yeah, see right there where you see atomic.com.
Yeah.
Those are my villains. Now, where these guys come from, these are the guys who were basically alternate reality fascists, where basically, the fascists won World War II. I mean, because there was no America at that time to stop them because they'd never been colonized, so this is kind of written from the viewpoint that there is a real atomic.com. It's a word that I got from Nostradamus, and the way I worked Nostradamus into the story is that the reason his predictions were confusing is he was seeing the two realities. He was seeing the atomic reality, and he was seeing our reality, and so he's mixing terms. That's why nobody could really figure him out. And then here, I have him like it's a website, worker there talking about them, and talking about all the different predictions and things come true, and like, why don't we sue this guy for talking bad about us? And like, well, we want to know what might happen next. And so, yeah, this is a little where I took the weekly picture, and you had them, talking about. Like, oh, everybody sit down. This is back during the toilet paper shortage where you couldn't find toilet paper anymore. Hey, you all must be sitting down. Good. I'll just tell you a few things. And down there at the bottom, you get a link where you get one of the Wild Stars comics. And that's the comic I have in there. It's like the only comic that's not just really a standalone, that's a part of a link. That's where all the Wild Stars 1 and 2 merge with the Wild Stars 3. And that's kind of where you get all the different plots really intersecting again. And so I've got that on the web for free with a little commentary running to the side. So it's kind of a free taste if anybody wants to get a look at it there.
I just want to jump in. Anybody who's listening later and not watching the YouTube stream, Michael, you've got amazing artwork, comic covers, interior illustrations, and whatever. Really cool stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, that was
go to the wildstars.com. The link should be in the description of the video. And you can hear and see and read all about all this stuff that you've been talking about right here.
Yeah, Wild Stars 5 just last chapter released this week. So, and the way I've got my website made is like that link at the bottom. You hit that takes you all the way back to the main page, or you hit the bar at the top, it takes you back to the main page, or you can hit any of those links on the side, it'll take you to those pages. Those are shortcuts I have on every page. So I try to make my pages interactive as I could. And so, yeah, it's fun. It's a basically a lifelong project, that I've been working on. And it's I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I just hope it's not a train coming at me.
I do have a couple of questions because I'm trying to fit this whole thing in my head that it's like drinking from the fire hose, getting all this history. What I find fascinating is that you've got this Wild Stars, it looks like a comic series. And you did a comic series in number 2, but you lost your artist halfway, and you've been writing books ever since. That wasn't deliberate. Did you deliberately choose to step away from comics? Was it originally envisioned as a comic series?
Actually, it was originally envisioned as a series of novels, and that's how it started out. And then I started the comics in the 80s. I drew myself. And matter of fact, one of them even printed myself on my own printing press in my garage. And that was a comic that actually had some firsts out of in the industry. It was actually the first comic book with foil stamping. It was the first comic book with die cutting. To my knowledge, it's the only comic book ever with die cutting on the back cover, and to have been not only written, penciled, inked, lettered, and everything by one person, but also even be printed by that same person. And so I used a printer technique. There was this one page where I have this mountain in the background. Well, as I go through the print run, I fade that mountain back out into the distance as the print run goes on. So if you have a real solid looking mountain in the background, you got print from the very first of the run. And I only made 2,000 of these. And then if you got it really faded, well, that's towards the back of the run. So that made every single copy of that comic a unique art print. So nobody's ever done anything like that before or since. So it's fun to be able to have all these skills, be able to do all these things that a lot of people don't think about. And back then in the 80s, I mean, they were so many things they weren't doing with comics. Now that the 90s, they started getting gimmick crazy, and so a lot of people complain about that. I'm like, yeah, it was my fault. I started
it. Well, and that's sort of, I want to ask about that because that's really interesting. Your typical comic creator, they seem to love what they do, but when you're publishing comics, you're just trying to get that product out there in as many hands as possible, right? Because you got to pay your bills. So, I want to ask, how much of your experimentation is just for, like, you're sitting there at your printer looking at the page and you're going, you know what, I'm not gonna I'm not going to add more ink, or like I'm going to change the ink for this particular page and just let it fade with each new copy? Or were you thinking of or were you thinking of a product, or were you just experimenting, going, I wonder how this goes?
Yeah, it was just an experiment. It was just something I was doing a wash on the plate, and like, hey, that fades out a little bit. Well, I think I'm going to keep doing that throughout the print run, and it just only played, because it wasn't affecting the foreground; it was just affecting the screen on the background. And I'm just going to keep on doing that, and so it's just something that I just discovered as I was doing it. Like, yeah, I'm just going to run with this, and it just was a happy mistake, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to keep doing it. So,
Yeah, and that's actually, I bet you could use that as a cool technique in just the mountain's a great example, because if you're sitting out here and you look out at Mount Rainier, out here in the Puget Sound area, for the most part, it's tough to see on a cloudy day. The mountain's often in hiding, so you could use that technique to really generate that sort of background foreground image.
yeah. So yeah, sometimes just stumble across things like that. That looks pretty cool. I like that. We'll keep doing it. So, and then I've been really blessed to work with some good artists. Frank Bruner did the covers on the Wild Stars 3 series. And, I realized, real quick, the reason I quit drawing it is like Dennis Kitchens of Kitchen Sink. He was telling me one time, he was looking for stuff, he goes, you got the talent, you got the skills, but you're not putting the time into it. You either need to decide if you're going to be a writer or if you're going to be an artist. And, I'd kind of realized that already myself, that I need to concentrate on one or the other while I concentrated on the writing. Well, so the first thing I did was start hiring professional artists to draw them. And then, that's real expensive. The comic book industry is a very limited market, only a couple thousand stores. Really, I mean, they say there's more, but as far as comic book stores, there's only a couple thousand of them, around. And, after the 90s, in the 90s, it probably was about 11,000 or something like that, but the market's just completely imploded. And I know, like Diamond Comics, there's a bait and tackle shop that had a rack of comics here in Arkansas. And Diamond counted them as a comic book store. So they counted everybody who had any stocking of a comic as a comic book store when they really were not. And so I was working for a really limited market. And that's why I kind of decided, okay, let's get back to the novels, because that opens up the market everywhere. And then, of course, you had things like Amazon come along, which made it easier. You didn't have to get a Fifth Avenue Street publisher in New York to carry your book to get it published, like you did back in the 70s. Now there are other ways to publish your work. And then Alex came along as kind of an independent publisher, and he was shopping at one of my stores, and he was asking me, say, "Hey, you've done some publishing. I'm getting ready to do this magazine called Casola." So I gave him some tips and answered his questions. And then he comes back with his first issue. I looked at it, I was like, "That's pretty good. I like what you're doing. Are you accepting short stories?" Because I had some stories sitting around I didn't want to send anywhere, because, like, again, you just get tired of being swiped. And so he published a short story of mine called Shark Fighter. Several more short stories after that, and then he started publishing my Wild Stars. And so, and he was one who's like, "We need to get you to a wider audience, so let's start serializing the novels in Crossover magazine, and then we'll do a book release later."
You guys have been partners ever since, so I take it that's working well for you.
Oh yeah, we're working well. He'll he concentrates on the marketing side, this and that. I had people offered to be the publisher of my Wild Stars comics back when I did those. I'm like, why do I need a publisher? Because I know all the details about how to make it, from the marketing and this and that. But what I didn't realize was how much time and extra effort that takes away from the creative side of it. And I probably should have accepted one of those offers. And in retrospect, I probably could have gotten better sales because you better promotion. Because like Chenault and Gray, those guys have gotten the sales up on my Edgar Rice Burroughs chronology far beyond what I could have done. I had the option to self-publish that myself. And that's when I was realizing, bringing other people in, they take a cut of the pie. But a smaller cut of a bigger piece of pie is a lot better than a bigger cut of a small pie. So,
I hear you.
That promotion, the word they can get out, they have skills that you don't have in that promotional area. And so that allows me just to concentrate on the creation side.
Well, you should teach your technique to some people. Talking with Ardenon Studios in the chat, he's got some history for us about the plate washing trick you're using with that comic page. Saturation and brightness changes was used in some American comics groups books to produce a pseudo 3D effect. Most comics today use full saturation everywhere, and it's a mess. What do you think?
Yeah, just there's a lot of things that they're just not doing right in the print industry. Of course, the industry's been through an evolution too. I was doing back on old. Originally, when printing started, it was letterpress, which was the same way the Gutenberg Bible was printed. Then you went to offset printing, and about the 60s when it really exploded. And that's basically when they say offset. Used to letterpress was everything was in reverse, and a roller would run across the letters, and then it would press against the paper, and you had a letterpress image. Well, with offset, an ink roller runs across the image, and then it offsets that onto a blanket, which then presses against the paper. And that's why when you're looking at it in offset printing, it looks the right way because it's got another flip going in the process, going to the blanket, where it's then done in reverse there, and then put on the paper in the right order. And now you got digital coming along, and that's just changed the ball game completely. And so I was using on my wall stars with the foil stamping and the die cut. I was using old letterpress stuff there on that, and then of course with the fading of the image, I was using offset printing on that. So letterpress, offset, and then of course now you got digital, and it's kind of funny. My first Wild Stars novel I did was just called The Book of Circles. It wasn't called Recalibrated. I called it Recalibrated later when I added a lot of new material in. Basically, I was using like one of my portfolios for the introduction. Well, then I hired the artist who did most of the Wild Stars 3 art, Dave Simons, to redraw the introduction. And added some other elements and some other bonus material. And that's why I called that one Wild Stars Recalibrated. But on the very first Wild Stars, The Book of Circles, when I collected the comics the first time, I was using basically the Ingram periodicals Lightning Source, and I was the first graphic novel that they'd ever printed. That might have actually been one of the first print-on-demand graphic novels, and so we had to have a meeting, a teleconference, because they didn't know how to do anything like that. And me being a former printer, I was using some printer terms, and I could tell I was confusing them. And then we got to one point when because I have a lot of strong images, positive, negative on there. A lot of ink coverage, a lot of black ink coverage, which we used to call that in the printing heavy blacks. So when I'm asking if they have any problem printing images with heavy blacks, the room goes silent. And then finally, one person goes, "I think he means heavy ink coverage." You hear all this nervous laughter. I'm like, what kind of book did you guys think I was wanting to print here? Yeah. So, it's kind of funny as terminology changes and techniques changes. It's been an evolution. So it's and one of the things I talk about in the Burroughs chronology and the Robert E. Howard chronology is those were things that span the different technologies. And actually, I've got an article going to be running in the winter issue of Kosovo magazine. Where this is a nonfiction article where I'm basically giving you the history of where science fiction came from, and it actually was from the invention of a machine, which changed one guy's career and trajectory, who was an editor who really fanned the flames of science fiction probably more than any other editor, and a lot of people have forgotten about him. So that's an article I got coming out in the next issue of Kosovo. So basically with that article and the two Wild Stars novel on either side, I'll be in 8 consecutive issues of Kosovo magazine.
Oh, that's good company. We love Alex. We love Kosovo around here.
He does a great job.
He really does. Great segue, by the way. I wanted to switch gears and ask you about your Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard works. Because last time we talked, you were doing Time War Armageddon. I remember these covers now. And since then, you did the Edgar Rice Burroughs story, and you mentioned that earlier, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into that. You had a lost story that was never published, and you finished that up and published it posthumously. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
All right, that's the Young Tarzan and the Mysterious She. It's the original short story was written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. He started it. It was kind of like a next wave of Jungle Tales that he was doing. And it's called Young Tarzan Ponders. And so we're basically Young Tarzan, back in the days of the Jungle Tales was with the tribe. And some of the apes are saying, "Hey, we just saw over the native village a white prisoner with blonde hair." And that's where he stops. And the reason nobody else wanted to ever tackle the story is like, well, Jane was the first blonde-haired woman he ever met. And, so people didn't know what to do because they didn't want to mess up canon. But I had a story that like this will work perfectly. And it also kind of gave me an opportunity to explain away some things kind of bothered me when I first was introduced to Tarzan. I started with Tarzan and Jules of Opar. And in there, he gets amnesia and has to learn who he is again. So me, as a new reader, I got to learn who he was that way. Well, in it, he first meets beautiful Law of Opar. He doesn't remember who he is. She's just throwing herself at him. He's like, nah, I don't want nothing to do that. I'm like, why? you don't remember Jane. You don't know, So that never made a lot of sense. Then he takes one look at Jane, still doesn't remember her. He's charging into guns. One look at a blonde-haired girl. So I wanted to, take that story and use that as a reason for where he basically imagined what his fantasy girl was like. He didn't actually meet a blonde-haired girl, but I worked into the story to kind of explain away all the different elements and use the elements, and he created a story from that, which also kind of resolved all the problems that I saw in Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar. I was like, well, why would Tarzan just completely turn his head at Jane? I mean, at the law, but then just charge guns at one glance at blonde-haired Jane, and with still not even remembering who she was. So, I kind of explained that psychology in that short story. And so it's gotten really good reviews. The only bad review I ever got was some guy said, well, you're breaking canon. He shouldn't have met another blonde-haired person. I'm like, okay, you didn't even read the story, did you, before you wrote your review? Because I don't break canon. It was kind of
Nice.
a hole there I had to fit through.
Well, it's a good thing. It sounds like if you ever get bored of your own stuff, you could use your writing skills on being a ghostwriter for Edgar Rice Burroughs stories.
Actually, I have written. I was talking to Jim Solis, the president, about one thing. And I was like, here's the reason why your movies are failing, because you keep going back in time. When Tarzan came out, he was a contemporary, and you need to modernize him. But whenever they try to modernize him, I've never felt they got it right. Because I like the idea. If I put that down in a plot line, and we might commission you to write a movie script. So I did. He looked at it and said, I really like that. Forget the movie script. We'll just do it as a novel, and then we use this as a novel maybe to promote what we would do for the next novel. So I wrote that up, and of course, this was back when I still had my 2 stores, so it took me a little while to get it turned in. By the time I got it turned in, they were doing another suggestion I made, like, why don't you guys get your own editions of your own books out, and rather than have all these people doing all this public demand? Well, they decided that was a good idea. They started doing that, and so they were in the middle of doing all that when I got my novel turned in. So I turned that in, called Tarzan Unbound, back in June of last year, and Jim said he's going to try to get it read by the end of this year. So. That's been sitting on his desk for better part of a year now. So, but basically, it's where I modernized Tarzan if he was, coming of age at this time. And it's wild. I approached it from the viewpoint of, like, with my Wild Stars. I had several novels written. I had a big long storyline, so I knew everything I wanted to do with it. And so I approached the Tarzan. What Edgar Rice Burroughs knew he was going to want to write all the Martian novels, going to write all the Pellucidar novels. All basically had his whole universe in his head, and so I wrote that, and so I have elements and cameos from all those things in that novel too. I had a lot of fun with it. It really was. It's a crazy, wild novel, introducing new concepts, and had some great moments. I take him on the hero's journey, and tear him down, build him right back up again. And I think it's a great story. Of course, I have to wait and see if they like it.
I don't know if you could go wrong. Now you've got me. My brain. I don't have this right in my brain. What are you doing right now with Cursover? You're doing another. What's the author's name?
Oh, we're doing some recovery of lost stories. I did when I was doing the Edgar Rice Burroughs chronology. Of course, I restored all these ancient images, and I was publishing images in there that were over 100 years old. Well, they needed restoration, and so while I was collecting all these old pulps, there was a lot of cool pulps on the other issues. I was like, that's pretty neat. So I created a page on my website, of pulps, and just showing a lot of other cool stuff. Well, then one image I put up, Robert Ludlum Jr. He's a science fiction writer also. He writes me up and goes, hey, that book's never been reprinted. Do you have all the chapters? We may want to get together and get this published. Well, remembering my mistakes from the not accepting a publisher's offers on my Wild Stars comics, I thought, let's bring Alex in on this and Krasova, because he can handle the publishing side. I've got the books. I'll handle the images and copying all the, scanning all the pages, and then also restoring the cover and creating a new cover. And Robert, typed up all the text, and I said I have to do the publishing. And that was called A Cosmic Courtship by the fellow by the name of Julian Hawthorne. The reason the Hawthorne name sounds familiar is his dad was Nathaniel Hawthorne, and the reason his stuff had just gotten lost to time. Nathaniel probably at one point was on the way to become a bigger name than his dad was. He's very prolific, really wrote good stuff, and he was all over the place. I mean, he wrote every type of fiction too. I mean, from nonfiction to fiction. And but it's like his dad is best known for a novel called The Scarlet Letter about an adulteress. Julian was a little bit of an adulterer. He had 2 families, so he had a lot of expenses to keep up with. And so when these guys offered him a partnership on a silver mine in Canada, he goes, "Yeah, that sounds great." And he kind of became the front man, the pitch man. And it turned out to be a con, and it wasn't real. And so they scammed all these people out of the money. Him being the front man, he took the brunt of it. He's like, "Guys, I got conned just like you did." But he's the one who went to jail, served his time, got out. He was very bitter about it. It really reflected in a lot of his writing about the judicial system and our justice system that we have. And he started writing again, and also commissioned all these stories from him. But these stories, unlike all his previous work, they were never reprinted. The publishers, book publishers, didn't want anything to do with him. And so he wrote things like A Cosmic Courtship, written in 1917 about the far-off distant date of the year 2001, which opens with a woman climbing to the top of a 500-foot building, jumping off, and then flying away with the use of a gravity belt. It's got telepathic teleportation. I mean, it's just got all sorts of wild stuff in there, and it is way ahead of its time. And it's you can tell it's so different from science fiction as it became, because this is back in the days when science fiction was first writing. People were just, they didn't know what to do. Edgar Rice Burroughs, when he first wrote A Princess of Mars about a guy going to Mars, astral projecting, he was so worried people were going to think he was off his rocker that he wrote it under the pseudonym of Normal Being, like my head is normal. Then the guy setting the type completely blew the gag. Oh, he must be Norman Bean. And so published as A Princess of Mars by Norman Bean. And he's like, okay, that killed the joke. All right, my name's Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I went from there. And but they just thought people think I'm crazy writing this kind of stuff back then because it was so different, so unique. And so that's really a very important part of the early evolution of science fiction that was lost to time. So other people did similar things. J.U. Geisey with Painless and the Dog Star Pack, another astral projection story, been reprinted many times since. But poor old Julian Hawthorne stuff just got languished and got forgotten. He also wrote, and this is so we published the Cosmic Courtship, did a Kickstarter on it, did very well, far beyond our expectations. We got those all shipped out. I also created a page on my website where let you see all the original scans. And I made it interactive with my entire website, so you don't have to go back and forth from a thumbnail to an image. I made it where you can go from one image to the next, or go anywhere else from my on my website from each page. And so what we decided, and one of the levels that we achieved, we said, hey, if we get to this level, we'll create a new imprint called Kursova Classics, where we do more of this stuff of taking books that have been lost that are in my library and publish them so other people can read them. Because unless you got those old pulps, you don't get to see these stories. And so the first thing we decided to do was let's get the rest of Julian's stuff and get it all out there. Well, he had this character by the name of Martha Clem. She was basically the first mistress of the occult, completely forgotten. And one short story about her had a couple of reprints called Absolute Evil. It's a werewolf story. Then he had another story, A Goth from Boston, never been reprinted. Another one, his novel, Martha Clem, was called Sarah Was Judith. That's never been reprinted. So we put those two books in two hardcovers, and then we collected some of his other short stories that have never been reprinted, Doors Dances and Fires Rekindled. Fires Rekindled is about the reincarnation. Doors Dances is about an eccentric millionaire who wants to adopt a little girl, and his wife, she's like, no, you want to adopt that child, give me all your money. So basically he gave up his fortune so he could adopt a little girl and then become a vagabond banjo player and Doors dance to his music. So it's kind of a heartwarming story. No science fiction element at all, but it's a cute story. And one of the things I kind of find interesting is about how prophetic he is in his writing, because there's a line in there where somebody makes a phone call. And, back then, 1917, 1918, when the story was written, phones were just a brand new thing. And he's talking about how, these phones, this is like opening a Pandora's box. I was like, oh, he has no idea. I heard a statement that statement was going to be in the future. And it's good stuff. So that's Doors Dances and Fires Rekindled is in a third book that we're doing. Each one of these books is available in a pocket paperback or in a full-size paperback or a hardcover or a magazine format. So you got 4 formats to choose from, or you can buy all 3 of the books in one format or another. And then it's being offered on Kickstarter right now. And then we took it another step farther and created an omnibus that collected all those books plus Cosmic Courtship. So you can buy these books in any format to match Cosmic Courtship if you got it already, or if you don't, you just want to buy them all in one big book. We did an omnibus. Now the first 2 books had artwork that was connected to the stories, and I restored the artwork on that. But Fires Rekindled and Doors Dances does not have artwork. Did not have artwork. So we got together with Dark Philly. She's done a lot of illustration for Korsova, and she penciled and inked the cover, and I colored it. And as Alex said, it made me popped a few monocles because I had a blonde-haired woman in ancient Egypt, having an encounter with the Pharaoh's wizard and the necromancer. And so, people are like, blonde in Egypt, but that actually is part of the story. It's actually accurate for the text. So, yeah, it's kind of funny how people have all these preconceptions. You do something a little bit different, it blows their mind.
Cool.
And that's all Kickstarter now.
I love that you and Alex are doing that. What's your role in the restoration of the art and the stories?
What provides the original text? I've got the original pulp, so I scan those to give Robert something to write from, type up and transcribe into a brand new type. And then, Alex, does all the editing and publishes the books. And then I restore the covers, or in the case of a couple of them, do the colorization on them. So basically, I kind of rescue them and then do the cover work.
Oh, cool. And that sort of leads into you're doing the same thing with, and we talked to Alex about this a couple of weeks ago about the Hawthorne stories. Really cool stuff, really fascinating stuff.
Uh-huh.
And the art that you guys used is some of my favorite that I've seen out of Korsova.
Oh, cool. Glad you're liking it. Those great images. Those guys were so talented back then. They were very well trained, and it just nowadays there's not the skills that they used to be.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what we were talking about in modern comics, where everybody's gone to digital, and so without the physical process there, and I wanted to make this point earlier, the physical process of actually printing the pages gave you an avenue by which to explore different ways to do that. And for someone creating digitally, they're sort of left to explore the limitations of whatever computer program they're using to generate those images. Yeah. So you may be able to do something really cool like those old covers on your computer, but you're going to have to sort of investigate the software and see if those processes and features have been implemented in a way that let you do it.
Yeah, it's nice to know what used to be available in print, letterpress and the offset, and then how can I use this, the new system to recreate stuff like that. It's like there was a series of a comics that Alex ran in his magazines this year called Bad Axe, and it was a good story. It was printed black and white back in the late '80s, early '90s, and problem was they didn't have the original artwork for it anymore. And this was printed in black ink only on very cheap pulp paper. 30 years in bins, pages rubbing together, and that ink had just smeared all over the pages and just really just destroyed the art. And so he was trying to recover it because he made a deal with the writer, the owner of the rights, to reprint it in his magazine. And he liked the story, and he'd actually bought them in my cheap bins at my stores. That's where he first discovered them there. And but he had no good copies of it, and the creator didn't have any good copies. And so I went back with Photoshop to restore them to make them look back like they originally did. So that was skills that I gained from all that restoration I did on all those pulp covers during the Burroughs book. On that Burroughs book, there are some images that I had to put as much as a 40-hour work week just to restore a single image. I was going down all the way to the single pixel on some images just to get it to look right.
My goodness.
Yeah, I want every cover to look like it did when it first came out new, not showing all that wear and tear from age.
Now that's a labor of love.
It is, yeah. And of course, you also learn a lot about those artist styles and this and that because I've got a blank spot here. What would they have done? But I got to pull elements from other parts of the painting so it'll match because you can't just airbrush something in on something that's got all this dot matrix all over it. So you got to make it look consistent.
That reminds me. That makes me think of something that I've seen. Very, very popular YouTube channels that are dedicated to just restoration work. Like it's just a guy in a museum. His job is restoring artwork and things like that. And he's got the, all the camera set up and everything like that. If you did that, I mean, it's a niche, but if you did that, you'd have a lot of people, because I'd be fascinated to see that process in action. Like, here we go. Here's this pulp cover. Here's where all there's damage and there's missing things. Like, let's try and fill this out the way the artist maybe had intended.
Yeah, I tell you what. Sometimes when I start these projects, when I finish them, I couldn't tell you how I did it because I just kind of get in there, start rock and rolling, and dive deep. And I've had to invent new skills that I didn't have because like, okay, well, how am I going to fix this? And by the time I get done, okay, I figured out a way, and I developed a new skill to do it. Yeah, I remember there was one image I looked at. It was so bad, I had like heart palpitations. Like, oh, how am I going to do this job? And by the time I got done, I was like, well, that looks pretty good. Then later, I find a good copy of it. And I don't even have to update it because what I end up matches with it. So it's nice when you can kind of, make that kind of detective work and sleuth your way to get it right.
Oh, sounds awesome. What other projects that have you been working on outside of that? I see a link on your page to the Robert E. Howard Conan art
Yep.
chronology.
Yeah, I didn't learn my lesson after the Egg Girls chronology. I lost myself into another one there, and now I'm trying to do the Robert E. Howard one, where I'm going to show you an image of everything he was ever published in, and so it's going to be even more images and more pages than the Egg Girls one. The nice thing about the Robert E. Howard chronology is not quite as old material. His stuff's kind of basically started in the late 20s, and so it's not quite as old as the Burroughs, which started in the 1912. And the first one, it's going to be the same format as the original chronology. Volume 1 deals with all the pulps. Volume 2 deals with all the books, both hardcover and paperback, in both the US and UK. Volume 3s and 4 deals with all the comics. And the Volume 4 will also include the UK comics, too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
And is that still in progress?
Yeah, I'm working on that now, yeah. I've got the
Holy
first 2
cow.
volumes completely done. Those were the hardest one because it's kind of funny because I did a podcast with, we hired a guy by the name of Rusty Burke, who's the president of the Robert E. Howard Foundation, to do the editing. And so we were doing a podcast on the day that Kickstarter launched on it. And I made the comments like, my gosh, I swear, if Robert E. Howard had a grocery list, people would have compiled all his lists and said the greatest grocery list of Robert E. Howard. He goes, oh, yeah, we're working on that. He's just joking, obviously. But I mean, I swear, everything that guy ever wrote on paper, it's been printed and reprinted and reprinted. Originally I was just going to do the first printings of all this stuff, and I realized it was so inextricably combined with the reprint stuff. I just couldn't cherry pick things. I just got to do it all. So it turned into a much more massive project than I intended. And he wrote everything. He wrote fight stories, horror stories. He invented sword and sorcery. I mean, he had adventures all across the globe. And he would mix genres quite a bit. And so that's why so much of his stuff was so original and different. He really was a prolific writer for just really only like about a 12-year period of time. It was incredible what he turned out.
Wow. I guess that's why he's got such a following after so many years.
And he had a lot of great artists illustrating his stuff over the years too. And so that was the same thing with Burroughs, all that great artwork. And unless you had a lot of these old pulps, a lot of these you never get to see again. So I went through and collected them all up, restored them to what they looked like when they were brand new, and now you get to enjoy them the way people did when they were first put out on the rack.
Yeah, really cool stuff. Stuff that I've never seen these covers, and you rarely get that kind of artwork these days.
Right. And they used to call it lurid because of the bright colors. I just like it. I think it looks great. I don't think there's anything wrong with lurid. Today,
it jumps out. It jumps out as from that era. Isn't
right.
We're talking the 1920s, so we're actually talking about the Art Deco era.
They were
and so bright red colors with a nearly nude woman battling cobras. That's you want to get those eyes on the magazine and see, okay, what's in this one? I want to read this one.
Right. Yeah. And the bright colors attracts your eye, and nowadays so many of the computer color stuff tends to be kind of monotone. And one thing a lot of computer colors don't figure out till they get into the career a little bit is that they're working on a light box. The image that they're looking at on their box is not going to print that way. It's going to lose the brightness and the contrast. So you've got to adjust for that before you go to print. And it's just like even when I'm creating these things, like say I've got a near mint copy of something I want to put in there, I just can't scan it and be done. Of course, you got to do the cropping and the arrangement, get everything squared and centered. But then you've also got to adjust the brightness and the contrast just to get it to look right. Because if you just scan it and go, it's not going to look right.
Well, you've got so much stuff going on, but so I want want to start wrapping up here. Is there anything that you haven't talked about that I've missed?
Oh, I've got other projects working on, but nothing really. This is stuff that's going on right now. So, my Wild Stars is my big thing. I love doing the nonfiction of the chronologies, and of course, I'm really enjoying doing with the Crossover classics and recovering these lost stories. So you hit the big stuff.
Cool. We'll make sure that there's links to all that for anybody listening later. They can hit the description and see what you're working out. TheWildStars.com is where all this stuff is linked, and it's great. There's all sorts of cool artwork. I just on a personal note, and this is a compliment, I love the whole Web 1.0 style page. It's just, here's some text, here's all these cool covers. Like something catches your eye, click on it.
Well, that's on purpose. I wanted something really simple that if you got an older computer, you can access my website, and because my computers aren't completely up to date, and I'll run into a website every now and then I can't get into unless I go to a different computer. And I didn't want that to happen on my website. I wanted to keep it a simple design, and like I'm also on the city council where I live, and so I've got a page on there, and people love it because I keep it simple. They can print out from there if they want to know what happened in a certain council meeting or on a certain issue. They can print out all the details from my website. So it's all about accessibility to me, and plus it's something I can write, and I update my website all the time. So
Love
it's
it.
myself and make it accessible to everybody with no matter what their level of the computer is.
That's cool. That's cool. I think in an age, as you discovered, in an age of specialization, sometimes you need to pay the man to do a job, like do your comic covers, and sometimes you get enough value out of working on it yourself just to make it exactly the way that you want it, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
fun besides.
yeah. Because that way, if I have something new or something comes out, I can make the changes instantly. And yeah, it's just the control that you have on that. And I had people wanting to build a website. People still want to say, "Oh, we can redesign your website where it's better." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it works." And this month, I'm probably going to get 200,000 hits on my website, so I get good traffic.
Cool. And I, I hate to say it, but I think we've just been talking over Daddy Warpig all day. Poor guy. I figured you would have spoken up if you had a question or something, but anything you want to ask or talk about today, DW?
I'm just trying to figure out where I can go to slave in the salt pits to get enough money to buy the 2 4-book collections, because they look just amazing and awesome, and I really want to have them sitting on a shelf so I can pull them down and read them. They're incredible looking.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I try to just pack them with so much stuff that you can look at them over and over again and still always be able to find something new that you missed the first time. They're just so packed with material. Yeah. Now the Burroughs one is available for sale now on Amazon, or you can go to Chenault and Gray. I know they had a 25% off sale running recently. I'd probably start there just to check, because sometimes they've run sales and forgotten to take the sale off, and they'll honor it if you can catch it while they still got that deal going there. So you can buy directly from. They have a store called Trollords, because they do a lot of role playing game, and they're also the guys who did my Wild Stars role playing game there too. And so you can either buy it directly from them, and I'd look for that discount, or maybe pick it up on Amazon. And of course, Robert E. Howard, the Kickstarter is closed on that one. And so there are a lot of bonus items that people got during the Kickstarter that won't be available later when it comes out. But yeah, these are real nice packages. The books have printed covers, and then the cover on the hardcovers are actually printed on dust jackets on top of that, and all of that is then put in a slipcase. I mean, it's a great package. They do a great job.
Awesome.
And they're oversized. They're giant. Matter of fact, just to kind of give you an idea.
Oh yeah, show us.
This is the Burroughs set. Now, this is a leather edition set, but this kind of gives you an idea of the set. And the leather sold out right away. But these things are just massive. And let's see, try to grab one here. These are pretty big, so they don't work well with a small screen, but just try to give you an idea of some of the art on the inside there.
Yeah, I'm trying to get StreamYard to show us enough. I guess you're up in the corner there. Yeah, beautiful. Look at that beautiful full page image.
Yeah, I got a lot of that in there, so get you a lot of stuff that you won't get to see unless you have the original books, and yeah, there's just a lot of fantastic stuff throughout these things, and they're you can tell they're loaded with information, and great color images, and like I said, I restored the images to where they look like when they were brand new. Now these leathers are long gone, but they still have the hardcovers with the wrappers.
Yeah, they're beautiful. I can see the images right there. It's on Amazon. Edward Rice Burroughs' 100-Year Art Chronology. Really easy to find. Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. Well, thanks for hanging in, everybody. I know we started late, but we're just about out of time. Check out Michael Tierney's stuff. Thewildstars.com. Always check out Cursova Magazine and art books on Amazon. Really cool stuff. Any other shout outs or anything you want to say, Michael?
I just want to say hi to everybody. Thank you for visiting, and I hope you find something of interest. Jonas, Cursova does great publications. You need to check out their work. Shadot Gray does great stuff. And if you're into role-playing game at all, you definitely need to check out their Troll Lord publications because they have Castles and Crusades, and they do a lot of great work too.
Oh, I'm going to have to do that. DW, anything else you want to chat about?
No.
I know.
Good.
We are so good. It's great having you on, Michael. For my part, I'm going to thank you for coming on. Always a pleasure. We'll have to have you on again. Check in sometime with whatever projects you're working on.
I'll be working on something.
Yep. Big thanks to Daddy Warpig, my inimitable host, who is awesome. Everybody in the chat, hey, I'm not going to do chat shout-outs today, but just so that you know, we love to have you here. It's so good to have chat. People here love the pulps. They love the artwork and everything like that. So we're just a good collection of good people here. I'm done for this week. I'm signing off for today. Daddy Warpig, take it away.
All right. I want to thank everybody who came and listened live to the show. You got to see some great artwork. Everybody who is listening later, you can come and rewatch the show on youtube.com/geekgab. That's youtube.com/geekgab. And on YouTube, you'll get a chance to see the artwork that everybody else has been drooling over. Or if you want, you can catch it on the Apple iTunes store, on SoundCloud.com, or the Google Play Store. So you can listen to it on the device of your choice. Unfortunately, you won't also be able to see the artwork. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We are signing off for now, but don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.